Hi everyone, my name is Dharma Grace and I'm back for my second video. I'm a psychotherapist and I wrote the book called Who Am I? A Journey from Abuse to Self-Love. There's a shout out for my book. The heart represents self-love and arms surrounding the heart is bringing love to yourself. It's a poetic retelling of my own experience with childhood sexual abuse. In my first video, I do share that my father abused me, and he abused me in the first half of my childhood, so I was quite a young girl. I was probably at the age of 7 or 8 when it stopped. I think that was because he was afraid at that point I might be able to tell someone or he might be found out, so that is the point at which he stopped. And I want to talk more today about repression and what a child does when they experience abuse, such as sexual abuse or any kind of trauma. You can imagine that a small child can't have an idea or an understanding of what is happening to them. So when abuse occurs, their only protection is to repress that abuse and also to disassociate from the abuse. So I know for myself, I repressed the abuse. I fully repressed the memory and the emotion that was connected to the abuse. All of the horrific emotion that I felt as that child, I repressed. How would a child go to school the next day and play with their friends in the schoolyard? How would they do a spelling test? How would they, continue with those memories in their conscious mind? It would be impossible for a small child to do that. Another protection mechanism of a small child or a child is disassociation. And disassociation is more where you disassociate yourself from what is happening. So I know myself when it was happening to me, a part of me would sort of float away and I would be I would not be aware. I would be separate from what was happening. I would be somewhere else. I would be focusing on something else. So my mind went somewhere else. And this is another very powerful protection technique that a child will use. It is innate in all of us to use repression and disassociation in abuse and in trauma. Even in cases where you are maybe a bit older and you do have some memory of the abuse, you may have partial repression. But what I found with myself and with my clients was that even in some cases where there was conscious memory of what had happened, they had still repressed the emotion of what had happened. So you might hear them talking about the abuse and they're just talking in a way as if they're explaining something that they did yesterday. So there's no emotion attached. They sort of are telling it from a very separate place to the emotional place of the abuse. And in all cases, that then becomes part of us. It becomes trapped down within our subconscious mind. And we are basically trapped in that trauma. We're trapped in the abuse. I know for myself, I used to describe it that the abuse affected every minute of every day of my life after it happened and until I healed. It affected my sense of self. It affected my fear. I was very afraid of things. There were specific things that I was afraid of that my mind had connected to the abuse. So another thing that a child does when they are abused is they have memories of things. There could be, if their abuser is an alcoholic, there could be the memory of the smell of the alcohol. And whenever they smell that, they then become triggered, especially later in life, in their adult life. And of course, there's just, there's so many things. It could be, for me, it was a closed door. So when I would go to sleep at night, I couldn't have my door closed when I was older. But I will share a lot more of that in later videos of sort of the specific awarenesses that I had. So I want to talk about how I finally did have the realization of what had happened to me. I was living with all of the signs of the abuse, self-loathing, fear of my own sexuality, an inability to say no and to sort of take power over my own body. I guess I had learned, in a subconscious place or deep down within myself that I didn't have the right to say no because somebody had taken that from me when I was very young, and I didn't know how to say no, and how to, have control of my own body. I let others have control of my body. As an adult, of course, not as a child. That was taken from me. I had no control over that. But I want to talk about going a little further on in my life. So I did struggle with this for many, many years. And when I did get married and I had sort of, protected myself and my heart from boyfriends and relationships that I had, I never fully got invested in them. They didn't get to that point where I needed them and I loved them and I couldn't do without them. And then finally I did meet somebody who got to that place within me where I felt, in love, and we got married and we had kids together. And, that's when my triggers really became heightened, was with my husband and in this relationship, because he then was the next main male figure in my life. So it was my father and then it was my husband. And so he sort of represented that love and abuse that was so connected in my life around the main male figure. And that's how it came out for me. That's where I got triggered the most. So I really struggled in my marriage, and I remember at one point things were getting worse and worse as I got older. I think we can't hold that down as much anymore. We can't shove those memories down, and they're coming up, they're coming up, they're coming up, they're being triggered. We're having extreme emotional pain. We're having panic attacks. I suffered from PTSD, and my panic attacks were getting worse and worse. So as I got older, I did go for therapy, and I remember with my therapist just saying, please, begging her to help me feel safe with my husband, because it was I loved him, but in so many ways I couldn't feel safe with him, and it would cause a lot of panic and fear and self-hatred and all of those things. So I did go to my therapist, and after a few sessions with her, I remember saying to her, and this was without any conscious knowledge or thought prior to my saying this, I blurted out, "Why can't he just die so I can deal with this?" And I remember being shocked myself when I said this, because I didn't have any prior thoughts towards that sentence. But of course, there was something coming from deep inside of me that did know that. So I understand now that I was protecting my father. And I think that we do that. We also own the abuse. We own the shame and the guilt. And because it's our father, or because it's somebody close to us, like I know for everybody, they have a different experience. But in my case, it was my father. And thankfully, my therapist said to me, "But what about you? What about you?" And that I heard that at a deep level. And at that point, I think, understood that I needed to heal and I needed to do what was best for me. And that was the turning point for me. At my next session with her, I was talking to her about some things, and I guess I was allowing, memories to come up, and all of a sudden I had a flashback. And flashbacks are when that little bit of memory comes up, and you have, for me, it felt like somebody was on top of me. I was terrified, and I felt very small. It's not like a movie where it plays back fully and you can see, characters, time, where you are and everything. But there's a definite deep knowing. There is the feeling of what's happening. You know exactly what's happening. And that was quite surprising. I'd never experienced a flashback before, but it told me so much, and it made me start to understand that something had happened to me. And as I go further, I started to understand that it was my father. I mean, deep down, I knew that. I think our subconscious has memories of everything we've ever gone through. And when we're ready, I think we have a protection mechanism within ourselves. And when we're ready to start to heal, and we're ready to start to look at these horrors and heal from these horrors, then I think the memories start to come. After that, I started to understand that it was my father that had abused me, and that it had been from quite a small age. I know I felt very small, very young, very innocent, very afraid. I had a few flashbacks with this therapist, and I started to really understand what had happened to me. And my next step was to start to research about incest and childhood sexual abuse. And I immediately ordered about, I think it was 5 or 6 books on Amazon. And I got them one day. They all came in a box. They all came together. And I sat on my bed and I opened this box up of books. And I started to read one of the books that I read, bits and pieces of for a long time. It has a wealth of information. It was an amazing book. It's called The Courage to Heal, and I recommend that to anybody who is going through this or has gone through this and is now going through their healing process, because it has so much information about how it affects us, how we cope with it, and there's different ways. Everybody's different, but it is an extreme. It is an abuse, and we have a lot of extreme emotion and extreme coping mechanisms and things like that. And it really, educating yourself on this is just one of the most important things you can do. So I sat on my bed and I started to read, and I read those books, not all of them all the way through, but I definitely read the majority of every single book. And I cried. I cried and cried and cried. And it was just like I was flooding emotion. I wasn't like, it was just tears flowing down my face. They just kept going. It didn't stop. And I felt such a deep sadness. I understood that this is what had happened to me. But at the same time, along with this deep sadness, was this relief, this understanding that it isn't who I was. None of this that was going on within me, all of the struggles that I had, it wasn't me. It wasn't who I was. It was what had happened to me. And that's my big message for everybody, is that you are not what happened to you. You are actually so much more than that. My daughter just came in, so she's gone back out. I want to keep talking about that. So when I got the books, it was my first step. It was the awareness. I understood now what had happened to me, and I understood that everything was to do with that. So that allows you at that point to, instead of own all of the abuse, you can start to put it where it belongs, on the abuser. All of the shame and the guilt and everything, now you can transfer onto the abuser. And it's not a simple thing. It's not fast. It's a real process, full of awarenesses. I used to say to people, I used to describe it before I had the knowing that I had been sexually abused as a child by my father. I used to say I was fighting a monster that I couldn't see. And when I had the awareness of what it was that I was fighting, now I had the power. Now I could change things, and now I could heal. So that was basically my story of how I repressed the abuse. And really, repression is a very big thing in all abuse that takes place. Even later in life, if it's very traumatic, we bury that because we can't deal with it. And for a small child, or any child, a teenager, it's a big part of abuse and trauma. And it's something, another message that I would like to give everyone is you have to trust yourself. People might say, you know, that happened a long time ago, get over it. Or, you know, people say the most horrible things. They don't understand. They just can't understand. But what I want to say is, until you've healed it, you are still living the trauma. You're still living the abuse. You're living with all the effects of the abuse. And it's as much there as it was when it was going on. So it's not true that it just goes away. If anything, it starts to come up more as you get older. I believe because we can't hold it down. We're kind of getting older, and when you're younger, you're busier. You're kind of like able to not look at it, you know, and it's not that you're consciously deciding to do that. I think it's also a part of us, a protection part of us, that we heal when we're ready, and we heal when we have the supports, more supports in place. I know I definitely did. So the other thing that I want to say is, you know, for anybody who, you know, there's denial in a big way for people that hear our stories, and for people that are related to us, involved, you know, close to us. And that's a real shame. It's a terrible shame. But one thing I want to say is that what I know to be true is this happened to me. It affected my entire life until I was able to heal it. It was horrific, and I know that it happened. I know that on a deep level. I know that on a memory level. But all of the ways that it affected me, the pain, the emotion, the self-loathing, those all came from somewhere. And I want you to know that those things came from somewhere. They're not who you are. Something happened to you, and that was abuse, and it's horrific. And the other major point I want to say about that is, when you start to heal, you're going to notice a difference. You're going to notice that you can shift these belief systems, that you will start to slowly love yourself. And that's the process, is realizing that you are not those things, and that you get to choose who you are. And that is my message, that once you start to heal, you will make incredible changes in your life. You will feel different. You will be, you know, it's just an incredible place to be, and I know you can get there. So it's another understanding that this did happen to you, because, you know, healing is healing the abuse, and the effects of that is absolute joy and understanding and love, and there's so many incredible things that come from that. So I'm going to sign off now. I'm constantly thinking about what I'm going to say next time, and I probably will post another video in less than a week. I'd like to talk about self-care. So hopefully you'll tune in and you'll subscribe, and I really just want to get the word out there, because I know that you are an incredible person. I know that you are a survivor. And I know that you're a warrior, because anyone who gets through something like this and survives is a warrior. So I love you guys, and all the best, and we'll talk soon. Okay.